with the curriculum and building these materials. And then, so this is like the end of the middle. 2 years after we'd run out of money, we're still working, and Australia and I edited with Keith's help, thank you Keith, a special issue of JMB where we basically tried to describe all of the stuff we had tried to do, which was fun and really hard. There's 6 papers in there. One paper is about the process of designing and scaling up, so sort of globally looking at the whole process of the project. Then there was a paper about, well, there's 2 local instructional theory papers, one about groups and isomorphism, one about quotient group. There is a paper about the mathematical activity of the teachers that I mentioned, that study that Stray did. And then there's a paper about mathematicians' experiences. And then there's a paper about the process of developing the instructor support materials that Elise was the lead author on. And it looks like this. I don't know why it makes me happy to like show a picture of an actual book, but that's an actual book. So yay. And then, still in the middle of the story, because while Stray and I are doing this huge job with no money for free, because research, right? Because that's one of the things I have to do to get promoted and stuff. Right, that was how we did. I was wondering why that was. Yeah. Anyways, while we were doing that, Mark Yanada, another PhD student of mine and a full-time community college instructor, he developed he calls it a bridge course, which is a course for students that are basically done with the community college mathematics that they can take, and they want to transfer to PSU or someplace else to be a math major. And so they're getting ready to transition from their sort of computational procedural courses to proof-based courses. And so there's, they usually have 5 or 6 of them kind of around, or 10 or 20, it's gone up over the years. And so he built a course to support them in that transition. And so what he did was I'm skipping ahead. I'm going to tell you about that in a second. Kate, meanwhile, took on the challenge of creating a concept inventory of a group theory, which is that thing that I asked for like $600,000 to do with a huge team. She did it by herself in a year. Anyway, so, like I said, Mark developed a bridge course. And so for his dissertation study, what he's doing is he's looking at the axiomatizing part of the material. So if you remember really fast the story, it's like the first 4 slides. So the part where they have the symmetries of the triangle, they have little pictures, up to the part where they had all those things look like algebra rules. So basically getting to sort of the generators and relations for the symmetries. So that process, collectively, for the bridge course, it slowed down significantly because one of the points is to talk about the idea of building an axiomatic system, making decisions about symbols, how to do proofs, things like that. And so he's really studying the idea, the collective process of coming up with these sort of set of axioms that end up going into the definition of group and the presentation for this particular group. And so I'm going to tell more about this, right? Yes. So, oh yeah, I just said that. Good. Okay, next. So he recently finished his first draft of his first dissertation paper, which is amazing. So a little thing about Mark. He started our PhD program while I was at ASU as a grad student. I know I look young and adorable, but I've been at PSU for a while now. So this is kind of a big deal that Mark is almost done with his first paper for his dissertation. So anyway, so he is looking at collective conventionalizing in the first paper, which is basically the process of choosing the symbols for the symmetries and the operation, and then how those function together. And so his analysis, basically, it turns out that how this happens, students rely heavily on their prior experiences, and they have a big influence on what happens. And he's used a couple of different related frameworks or constructs to think about that. One is the notion of metaphor, so down and tall, the idea where you have an idea in your head about how a thing is going to work because it reminds you basically of another thing that you saw before that looked like that. I think I may have even made David Tall sound simpler than David Tall usually does. He's super colloquial. I don't know how I pulled that off. But I think I might have just done that. Anyways, then he also looked at similarity comparisons, which ranges from sort of pattern matching type superficial similarities to full-on analogies. So these are the kind of basically different ways that the students, based on their prior math experiences, engage in this activity of trying to choose these symbols and how they work together. And then for his second paper he's working on now, he's looking at sort of the next step after that, which is the part where they sort of select which rules need to be in the system to describe how it works, how those going to look, do they need them all, do they need some of them, which ones need to be in there. And for that process, he's trying to use Harrell's idea of intellectual need for that. So, and he's given a couple of talks on that over the years. Here's a couple of RUME presentation photo slides from Mark's work. And then there's Kate, who, I think she's not here. She's missing this because she's sick.
She's in her room.
Poor thing. Anyway, that means I can brag about her, not worry about her being embarrassed because she's kind of shy. She did, I don't know, something that's probably impossible, but I knew her, so I actually decided that she could do it. And I was right. And congratulations to her, Kristen Lou, they're going to Texas State in the fall. So, new power group at Texas State, look out for that. So, first thing Kate did was she looked at all of the previous efforts to develop concept inventories and basically figured out what the best practices are, and then did those. Some things I learned from doing this, but mostly I just let her do it. So she, this is a diagram which you saw if you've been in any of her talks. So she figured out what the domain was, and so she used this Delphi process, which involves triangles and stuff, and then created tasks, and then went through a process of like open-ended questions, surveying, interviews, another round, basically to create and validate and then study the psychometric properties of this instrument. So she talked about this last year. She talked about the first part, which is sort of using a textbook analysis, literature review, and a special interview method with experts to figure out what the important concepts were. Talked about that last time. Here's her timeline. It was actually even scarier on the blackboard when there's more detail in it, but this is what she did. So she did her Delphi study, developed tasks, and sort of interview, all this stuff. Pretty tightly coordinated. If you're interested in sort of what came out of it, if you've done any of these, so this is what this is the topics for each of the questions she ended up with, and the number of responses for each choice. You'll notice almost no throwaway distractors there, so people are picking these. So she worked really hard to have distractors that corresponded to ways of thinking that mattered. And so that is awesome. And now she's transitioning to sort of putting that to work. So if you went to her talk this time, she started digging into the tons of qualitative and quantitative data that she generated while making this, to try to dig into some things to figure out more about what we know about group concepts. So one of the things she's doing is actually kind of going back to all that work that existed back in the 90s, and a lot of it was qualitative studies, surprisingly, interview studies, and sort of pushing back a little on those things with all this data that she has. So one thing she talked about this time was looked at the binary operation concept, and she found out that it's maybe not hard for students to figure out that something is a binary operation, but there's a lot of things about binary operations that are hard to understand. Okay, that's that, and that was her talk. Hopefully you went to that, it was really good. Look for more for her in the future, because she has a ton of data now, and now she has this tool, so she can start learning more about how students understand groups nationally. So that is the middle of the story. Oh, perfect. All right, so new beginning. So Kate's working on her publishing from her dissertation. Mark's working on his dissertation. So Stray and I are back to work now after, I don't know, graduating and taking a year off from doing things. That was me. I took the year off. Estrella graduated. Started as professor. So Estrella is taking on the challenge of developing and studying supports for mathematicians who want to teach with these kind of materials. And I, with Annie Bergman, taking on a new adventure in educational technology, which I'll tell you a little bit about. But first, the Times Project. So at the end of her first year as assistant professor at Virginia Tech, Estrella got a grant with Christy Larsen and Karen Green, and in one step, like, got more grant funding for her career than I did, totally. Not even jealous. Maybe someday you'll get rejected 4 times in a row. I have twice. Anyway, so the project is called Teachers of Inquiry-Oriented Mathematics and Establishing Supports. So it's a research and development project focused on improving undergraduate math instruction. Specifically, they are addressing the following research question, which is kind of a tough composite type question, which I can't even read. So what are the relationships among instructional supports, instructional practices, instructional characteristics of the institutional context? All of this we're studying for the purpose of better understanding how to generate instructional change in undergraduate mathematics. So here's what the team is doing. They're designing, investigating, and evaluating a system of supports for mathematicians interested in instructional change. And developing an instructor support model. They're investigating teacher change in the context of their support model. And looking at the relationship amongst the supports, the instructors, and their instructional practices. And then finally, in order to evaluate this, they're developing a way to assess. They're developing a model, a measurement for inquiry-oriented instruction. And the Times Project features 3 sets of inquiry-oriented curricula. So there's IODE, Chris Rasmussen, yay! Linear algebra, Warro's Andy, I bet Chris is involved in that one too, isn't he? And then there's the TAPU curriculum, now apparently going to be called Iowa. That's the other 2. And I'm currently working on an update for the website. I whined a little bit about running out of money. Stray got a bunch of money, gave me a little bit of it, so I was able to go back and do some polishing up of the website. And so it should be launching in June, a new version of the website with some gaps filled in, facelift. It should be awesome. And if you made it to this talk, which a lot of you did, you got to hear some of the effort that's so far gone into developing this measure for inquiry and instruction. Synergy. So the abstract algebra team, part of Times, is using Kate's instrument as one of the things they're using to help to test the efficacy of their instructional supports. So that's pretty cool, right? So in the best case, each of the Times Fellows will ask their students to take the GCI and identify a comparable class and give us comparison data. Worst case scenario, we have Kate's 420 responses to compare to like a national sample. So that's pretty fun. So Stray and Kate working together without me having to do anything, which is kind of the way to do it, I think. Just what if something should happen to me, God forbid. All right. So finally, the newest thing. So back to my old ways, putting together a team of people I'm not giving any money to. This time, Sucker, a high school teacher. This is actually Joanna's husband. Teaches computer science at a high school. Has these extremely gifted high school computer programmers. And our goal is to try to develop computer apps that can somehow provide experiences like what the students who experience the type of curriculum have. Partly this is because for a long time it's been really bothering me that I haven't produced anything for students. So not only does the instructor have to have these support materials, which I consider to be a good thing, there's not really something good for the students other than what the teacher might produce with them. So when I teach here, I sort of have a website that I keep updating, telling the story of what we've created together, for example, but I don't have something for students to use. So this is one of the things we're thinking about developing for students, is these apps so that they can do some of this reinvention somehow with a computer app. So Annie and I started this past summer. We had these, was it like 10, I think, of these high school kids. They came and we taught them group theory in 2 weeks, which is a little irritating. It wasn't very hard for them. In fact, one of the hardest things is to getting them to realize what we're trying to